Okay. Britt Cox, welcome to Mostly Training. Thank you for being here.
Sam, thanks for having me.
So, just a little
It's an honor.
rundown on you for our listeners, and we're going to get into the details, but it is funny how you have to give a sort of a synopsis of someone, and then there's kind of minimizes the experiential side, especially when for you, a four-time Winter Olympian, your first Winter Olympics was as a 15-year-old. Is that It's
Yep.
just
Yeah,
it's
the ripe old age
crazy,
of 15 was the first games. Feels
crazy.
like
So,
a lifetime ago.
well, a half a lifetime ago for you, but that's half of your life, and you're 30 or thereabouts.
Yep. Yeah, just ticked over 30.
So 30 years old and half your life, you've been an Olympian.
Yeah, I've actually never thought of it in that way, but that's true. And yeah, four Olympic cycles is a long time. And I think I actually listened to you on one of the previous episodes talking about Olympic sports and how, we have this one opportunity every 4 years to perform. And for me, my sport's like over in 30 seconds. So, yeah, 4 years of training for that 30-second moment is a heck of a long time.
Is it a is it a single run?
No, it's not. So, generally in my sport, in
Yeah.
freestyle mogul skiing, on the World Cup circuit, the format is that you compete qualifications round. So that's one run. The top 16 athletes go through to the finals, and then the scores are wiped clean, and you get to compete again. So second run, and then the top six athletes from that final move into the medal round, which is called the super final or final two. Again, the scores are wiped clean. So if you're getting into the super final, it's three competition runs, and then you have training runs in between. Um, at the
So,
Olympic Games, they have an
yeah.
extra round. So they
Okay.
do qualifications round.
Yep.
The top 10 automatically through to finals. The rest of the field get a second run. And I think it's the rest of the field up to 20th place or 25th place or something, get a second run, and it's their best of those two scores through to the final. But then
So,
the final is the same format.
okay. So all going well, it's if it goes very well, it's 90 seconds, 2 minutes,
Yeah, that's
cut
it.
up into 30-second chunks, and that's it. And every 4 years. There are some pretty serious intermittent events, and from what I could tell, 2017 was a good year. You're world champion in your sport, which is always a good thing, and something that can't be taken away from you. That's kind of like that's a crown that you wore for that year, and you were also the overall World Cup winner for that year, which, as far as I would be guessing, for the World Cup events, you'd accumulated the most points.
Yeah, that's right. So in our sport, the obviously Olympic Games are every 4 years, the World Championships are every 2 years. So that'd be in terms of order of priorities of the events that I was targeting, it goes Olympic Games, then the World Championships. And then under that, you have the World Cup circuit, which is every year. Um, so for me, 2017, I was definitely prioritizing the World Champs, and that was going to be the very last event of the season. But we had the entire World Cup season ahead of that, which was, I think, 10 different events. So 10 stops on the tour, competing week to week. And the way the World Cup circuit works is kind of like in cycling, where the leader carries or wears the yellow jersey. And so I managed to
Mm.
win the first event of that season and hang on to the yellow bib all the way through till the last event, which meant that I secured the overall World Cup title. So even though that was the World Champs was my focus for that season, the when I reflect on it now, I'm probably more proud of the World Cup title,
Mm.
because it was not just a reflection of performing well on that one day, the three times 30-second runs. It was performing consistently across an entire season. So yeah, it was definitely a highlight of my career that entire season, and one that I look back on with lots of fond memories.
Would it be a less likely that an Australian would win the overall on points because most of those events are not going to be, it's like that's a chunk of time where you're away on the circuit. And if the world champs and the Olympics are the big events, then my guesses would be in rowing, we also like have a yellow jersey. Rowers would be familiar with that. but the World Cups are it's the where you get to compete against your competitors that you'll see at the World Champs and the Olympic Games. In practice, you're in competition at a foreign venue, so it's a simulation as much as anything with very high stakes. But in order to win the overall World Cup, you've got to be there and
Yeah.
you've got to be consistent, and there is not in Australia.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, none of the World Cup events are in Australia, and the competition season is November through till March. So you're pretty much on the road that entire time competing. And then obviously we only have snow in Australia for 3 months on paper, but you probably only get about 2 months to 6 weeks of really good training on snow in Australia. So we're away from home probably about 8 months out of the year. But it's interesting. The only time I actually ever competed the entire World Cup season was the year that I won the tour. And I think part of that was strategically because I was always prioritizing the world champs in the Olympic Games.
Yeah.
So if I wasn't, I was halfway through the season or three-quarters through the season and I wasn't in a position to finish in, say, the top three, then I'd prioritize coming home earlier, having that short recovery rest break before getting back into preseason and training.
Yeah.
And I did that quite a lot in the earlier stages of my career, sort of knowing that I was building the foundation up to something a lot bigger towards the end of my career. And now yeah, you see that with other teams doing that as well, prioritizing certain events over others. But then I think it's difficult because funding also plays into that and qualifying for events. I was in a position where I had enough points at the time that I knew my Olympic Games qualification was secure or World Championships qualification was secure, so I could pick and choose which events I was doing. And I know that some people don't necessarily have that luxury because they haven't got their ranking high enough. So it does become a bit strategic in some sense, and you do have to pick and choose. And yeah, that 2017 season, I was holding on to the yellow bib and I didn't want to let it go. So
Yeah.
I felt that I may as well keep going with that. And I felt like I could use those events as training as well, leading up to the games.
I want to talk about 2018 because if that was the year before, then you go in with something that looks like expectations. I want to know what those were like, especially if that's your third games at the time. So take it back to there's 2014, 2010, 15. So I want to know about a little bit about the life before you
Mm,
become a 15-year-old Olympian, because I was like pretty
yeah.
keen pretty early, but that's a proper elite athlete as a 15-year-old. Now I read or heard just to be better informed for this conversation that we said you grew up in a family of mogul skiers. That's true?
Kind of.
Semi.
I grew up on the mountain, so
Right.
yeah, my family worked in hospitality on the mountain at Falls Creek, so I was pretty much skiing as soon as I could
Are
walk
they still
from a really
there?
young age. They aren't. They moved about 2 years ago.
Okay.
A bit of an ocean change, which is
All right.
yeah, they met up there and they spent their entire lives up on the mountain, so it's a big life change for them. But
Oh, I'm sure.
I'm so like I feel so grateful that I got to grow up in that environment and
Yeah, I love falls.
yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah, yeah.
It's one of the few resorts in Australia, or probably the only one in Australia that has that kind of alpine village feel that you
Mm.
see in Europe.
Mm.
Ski in, ski out. So I I was so lucky I got to grow up in a place where I could click my skis on outside the front door, go skiing after school. Like I went to school on the mountain. So as soon as the school bell went, I was out there with my older brother skiing around the mountain pretty much until the lifts closed. And we're lucky that the primary school had short recess and lunch breaks so that we'd actually finish school earlier and we'd be able to go out there on snow. So when you think about all the research that comes out these days about having 10,000 hours of training under your
Yeah,
belt, I think
yeah.
naturally I was getting that as a youngster. So I think from then it went through to school competitions. So competed in the inter-schools events.
It might seem obvious, but because if that's your environment, did you
Mm,
start, is it two or three, like as you could stand, like clipping into
Yeah, like
Yeah,
these little, basically little plastic skis that
yeah,
you don't actually have ski boots. You just wear your normal snowshoes, and they have straps on them to strap your feet in. So you just kind of get used to sliding, that sliding sensation on the snow. And I'd be standing in between my mum or dad's skis, and they'd
mm,
hold a pole in front of me, and I'd just hold onto the pole.
yeah.
So yeah,
So you're
basically,
right. So it's your, and then so that's your normal, as normal as walking,
yeah, moving
basically. So you
around
don't
back.
know it, you don't even know any different.
No, don't know any different.
Yeah,
That's, I went to school on my dad's snowmobile. Like it was,
yeah,
now I look back on it and I think, wow, that was so unique, and I'm really lucky to have grown up in that environment. But just exposure to it from a young age, I think, meant that when I did start to actually train for competitions,
yeah,
the sport itself was quite it wasn't scary, if that makes sense. I think a
yeah,
lot of people go into mogul skiing and or skiing in general and find that it's very unnatural and counterintuitive. So I think right from the outset, I had that advantage.
yeah. We were talking a little bit before this, and I did mention that I had some skiing experience in some moguls, and so this is one thing where I actually go, yeah, I do know what that feels like because by the time I was 14, I'd been skiing for 10 years and I certainly wasn't scared. Yeah, I could go down anything. If it's tricky, just go a little bit slower, but there wasn't anything in Australia that I wouldn't ski down. So moguls, bigger moguls, it's some might be more intimidating, some might be icy, but not like you know what you can do at that stage. So when did you start competing?
So we actually have in Australia the inter-schools competition.
Yeah.
So first ever mogul competition was the inter-schools, and I was 8.
Yeah.
So competing in third grade, I think I was.
And always
And you compete.
moguls?
I did all of the different
Right.
skiing events. So
Yeah,
I did
cool.
alpine, downhill, ski cross,
Yeah.
cross country. Even our school wanted all the students to compete in all the different
Yeah.
disciplines, and I was, yeah, one of those kids that just wanted to put my hand up for any of them. Didn't do any snowboarding, but all the skiing events. And I was in the local race club, so I got those foundational skiing skills
Yeah.
doing alpine ski racing. But first event was when I was 8, and mogul skiing was one of them. And that was sort of where it took off from there. I loved all the different elements that were involved in mogul skiing, and the variety in terms of the turns technique, the jumping, the speed, and then having to put all those elements together in a competition package, under pressure when you're performing on demand in front of the judges. I think I just loved that pressure and excitement.
Well, yeah, if you're competing for as long as you have been, you have, well, I assume skiing's fun and you have to like, if you like competition, then it's going to be a pretty good avenue given the way you were raised. But you must have showed some talent early on, and as sport in of itself is self-selecting. So you're doing all of the events and it would, my guess would be you were very competitive at with moguls. So at some stage, is someone like, let's focus on this, or do you remember how that occurred?
Yeah, I so as I said, I did all the different disciplines,
Yeah,
and but I did summer sports as well. Like I was just a very active kid. I think having an older brother definitely helped. Was always outside after school, even in the summertime. I just wanted to be doing whatever my brother and his mates were doing. So whether it be bouncing around on the trampoline or riding our bikes, going running, um, I think I just chased after him. But we did a lot of swimming as well, actually. But I do remember a particular point. I think I was about 12 years old, and I had started competing in more national level events, in the sort of
yeah,
junior category, junior division. But and I think at those events they had coaches there looking at identifying talent for the development team, so NSWIS, and I think one of them must have come up to my dad or something and said, is this something Britt wants to do? And I remember my dad specifically coming to me and asking me, he's like, Britt, you do all these activities. Like, is there one that you love the most or
mm,
one that you want to do the most? And he's like, because if you get an opportunity to go and train with this team, then it means you can't go and do the other thing. For example, going overseas means you're not going to have a summer, so you're not going to be swimming. He's like, "Do you want to swim or do you want to ski? Like, what do you want to do?" And I was like, "I just want to ski moguls. I love moguls."
Oh, okay.
And yeah, and I am actually so grateful looking back that my dad literally asked me, he's just like, "What do you want to do?" And I don't think there was ever any doubt that that was the sport that I wanted to do. I just loved it so much. And I think having the influence of watching the Winter Olympics, watching Elisa Camplin in 2002, I think the timing of that was probably a really big influence on um, my passion for the sport and love for the sport. So the Olympic Games in Salt Lake City 2002, I would have been 7 or 8 at the time. So I think quite young and impressionable. And seeing Elisa win that gold, that was the first female to win a Winter Olympic gold for Australia. It was the same games that Stephen Bradbury won our first gold. I think that was just, to me, it was like, oh, well, it's achievable as an Aussie to be able to do that. So,
Oh, two.
um, yeah, 2002. Yep.
Yeah. The
23 years ago. Yep.
first Olympian I ever met was Ali Stegel. And I remember like,
Oh, right. Yeah.
that's because I was at the snow and I was like this, and I was closer to that orbit than I was in any other sport at the time. And I was like, that's an Olympian, there's an Olympic medalist, thinking that's like, that was the first person I thought, oh, that's really cool.
Yeah.
Not that that had any relevance on me for a while, other than it was a thing that in my house, at least with my mum, the Olympics was a big deal. Like when Sydney won the Olympics, she woke me up to watch the announcement. Like, let's go watch the fireworks. So it was pumped into me like, hey, this is a cool thing, but it's a thing over there.
Yeah. Yep.
Did you in your household, was that it for you, or in terms of was it seen as a really cool thing, or was that something you just came across yourself?
It was definitely seen as a really cool thing.
Yeah.
My family loved watching the Winter Olympics. I think growing up on the mountain or living on the mountain meant that we had strong passion for winter sports and snow sports in particular. And so naturally, when the games were on, it was definitely on the TV. And also coming from a really small community at Falls Creek, there were a number of people that lived on the mountain that were Olympians. So Adrian Costa was from Falls Creek, and my family knew him, and so he was competing in those games as well. So we had that connection there and interest in watching the games as well. But then I would also say that the following year, when I did compete in my first ever mogul skiing event, so 2003 in Mount Buller at the interschools, the Flying Kangaroos, so the Aussie freestyle aerial team, were actually training on the run next to where my first ever event was. So on Chamois, if people have skied up
Mm.
Apapula, the Chamois run is where the aerial side is. And Elisa Camplin was training there at the time. And I had my first ever competition on the run right next to her. So after the event, I knew she was training there. And this was a year after she'd won gold. So I stood at the top of the chairlift and waited for her to get off the chair because I wanted to say hi and be like, I met Elisa Camplin. And she actually stopped and skied over to me and took the time to chat with me. And so I think, again, it wasn't, me being able to meet her and see her in the flesh and go, this is like, she's another normal person like
Yeah.
you or I. It also broke down those barriers of feeling like the Olympic Games were something that was well beyond my reach in this other world. So again, another pivotal moment, I think, in my upbringing in terms of influencing my career as a skier.
Seems like in the people I've spoken with so far that there's also always some variant of this where it became normal at some stage, and then almost tangible, as opposed to, and because of the difference between it being tangible and actually doing it, I probably minimized that part of it, taking it for granted, because that's just the smallest little part of it, and then there's all the work you need to do thereafter, and all the things that need to go in your favor to be able to
Mm.
compete on that stage. But it's a lot more conceivable if can reach out and touch someone that has been there themselves. And the fact that I could remember meeting Zali Stegler, and more importantly, remembering that it was important, like it seemed like a big felt like a big deal to me, not because someone was going, oh, this is important, because I was like, that is cool. It does give you some sense of, well, we're in the same, like we're in the same room. Okay, that's a start.
Yeah.
Like we might not
Yep.
be able to do the same thing, but if we breathe the same air, so there's more potential than not. And maybe people that haven't been in that room, haven't even had those exchanges where they had a meaning and they had meaning at the time and they left an echo that you could still remember even after all your experiences. That's still important. Not everyone gets that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think family do play a really big role in that, or at least the people that you spend most of your time with. And I think I'm lucky I grew up in an environment where self-belief was really instilled in me from my parents. Um, it was never really a matter of like if you can do something. It was more a matter of like, oh, it's not if you'll be able to reach that goal. It's if you train, you'll be able to reach that goal. It
Yeah.
was all everything was relative to the effort that you put in. Um, and now as a retired athlete, I'm realizing that that doesn't necessarily apply to life outside of sport as well as it does in sport. And maybe that's why I love sport so much, is it's so black and white in terms of the effort that you put in and the
Yeah.
reward that you get from that. But yeah, my parents were very much a big influence on, if you want to achieve something, you got to put in the work.
Was
And
it just, hey, put in the work and you'll be successful, or was it you got to put in the work if you even want to like, did they, because I've seen this a few times and I think about this a bit as a parent and I think about, there's a bit of a tough love side of things. And I look at my wife's family and I joke with her about it. I joke with them about it. It's more of the everything's amazing. Everything that everyone does is amazing. Yeah, like just wonderful, like just really pumping up the tires. And so
mm,
there's that self-belief and it's not fake. It's that's literally
mm,
what they believe. Everything is amazing, and also you can do everything, and you're great at that. And there's no sense of trying to make it real because the world is harsh, and so we need to. It was just you can do it. So, what was your family's particular brand of self-belief?
um, I think it was more you've got to put in the work. And I remember I was probably about 10. I had this competition. It was a race actually, so alpine ski racing, the one where you're
Mm,
skiing around the gates, which you would be familiar with. Um, and I got disqualified because I'd messed up one of the gates. It was in slalom, and so upset. I was so cranky about it, and was talking to my dad, and I was like, how come they made the course so difficult? Like I know that the coaches that set the course were from the Mount Buller Race Club. I was from the Falls Creek Race Club, and they set up this gate combination that they'd been training the Mount Buller kids on for weeks. And I was like, I'm not. It's not fair. It's not fair. And um my dad just came and said to me, he's like, no, you went around the wrong gates. That's the rules of the sport. That's you. That's you've got to be accountable for that and take responsibility. And it's about what you can do moving forward. And all you can do is train that combination now, so that next time that comes up, it's not going to be that way. So I think it. And then I know also at that same event there was another athlete whose dad went in there, complained to the officials and all that, um and my dad said, "There's no way I'm going to do that. Like you went around the gates the wrong way. Like Britt's got to learn the lesson." So I think I didn't think much of it at the time when I was a kid, but now looking back at it, I think that just really showed me that you've got to take responsibility for your own actions and your own training, and if you do the wrong thing, it's not someone else's fault, it's yours. So I think, yeah, probably more the tough love route.
and then obviously, I would align with that message. Probably at all stages. In principle, that makes sense, but with a 10-year-old, say maybe we're building some buffer. Maybe if you were 11 or 12, or like these are conversations you can imagine having with a developing athlete, but not with most 10-year-olds.
Mm.
And girls do mature more quickly than boys. So you could be a particularly astute 10-year-old, and by that time you've got some competitive years, but also years of comfort on the slope. So everything's normalized, but it's still ahead of schedule. So it wasn't just your exposure and time on the snow, but it does seem like the way people orienting around you may have just been your family, but this is the conversations you have with someone that wants to be an elite athlete, which is this is the nature of sport. It's competitive. There are boundaries. You need to observe those. If you don't or can't, that's on you.
Yeah, I think so. And that's why I love that I was exposed to sport from such a young age, and it was a really big focus for our family. Was I think there are so many lessons that we learn in sport that can be applied to life. I think sport's a great metaphor for life in so many different ways. And maybe that was just my parents' approach to parenting was to teach me things through sport, whether it was intentional or not. But yeah, I think even going back to that particular example, at that point, and maybe this was unique for a 10-year-old, but I already knew that I wanted to be an elite athlete. I wanted to be the best in the world at something after I'd watched Elisa win gold. And I think at that point in time, I might not have specifically known what sport I wanted to do that in, but I knew I wanted to be the best in the world at something. And my parents knew that because I talked about it quite often. And so maybe it was intentional on their part in terms of the way they were trying to teach me these life lessons. But yeah, I think looking back on it now, there's so many different factors that have influenced and shaped the way I approach training and my sport, and hopefully now life outside of sport.
Parents must be special people to know that they need to be real with you because of your ambitions, but they also knew that they didn't need to be so real with you that they weren't squashing your ambitions because if you said you saw that and that, how old were you in 2002? So
Uh,
9,
7 or 8.
7 or 8. Okay.
Yeah,
And
seven turning 8, depending on yeah
so this is
what time of
starting
year.
as like, hey, I want to be the best in the one you and you're talking about it in your family. And in most families, there could be any number of ways to sort of deal with that. You sort of just ignore it. Could be one,
Yeah,
uh, don't be ridiculous. Could be another. And then there's just actual support and interest in some version of that, which every now and then you're going to have a little psycho like yourself that his
yeah,
parents don't say, no, that's silly. And so you believe it's possible. You see other people. So starts feeling very real, but that's still from 10 to 15, things must have escalated quite quickly. So as you knew that moguls was the sport, and just for the listeners that don't know, I think been
mm.
meaning to drop this in, but let me run through my
You're like,
what what
what
I
the
think
fuck is
moguls is,
moguls?
what I think moguls is, and so moguls, big mounds of snow, and a mogul's course has moguls and then a jump and then moguls and then a jump and then moguls and then a finish line. Is it usually two
Yeah,
jumps?
yeah, two jump, always two jumps.
Okay.
Yeah,
And
in summary.
you're both being measured on the speed that you get down. So speed is important. The precision of the turns, which in part is denoted by the closeness of the knees. The knees need to stay together. Is that indicating control or what's the word for it?
Yeah, so technique.
Technique.
So the so it's obviously a judge sport, and the way the judging works is your score is based on 60% of your score is based on the turns technique. So
Hmm.
as you were saying, it's your body position. So having your feet and legs together. Anytime you have a leg split, so the judges can see daylight or snow between your legs is a deduction. They want to see range of motion. So you often see with mogul skiers, they wear knee patches on their pants,
And
and
that's to
that's
show the up
yeah
and
to
down.
show
Yeah.
range of motion, but also angulation. So the judges are also looking for the angle of the knee or foot and the turn shape, so the direction of the ski. So ideally, you want to have a really direct, straight ski line. So in mogul skiing, you'll see that the course has got various lines. You get to
Yeah.
choose whichever line you want to ski, and you want to take the most direct route possible on that line. If you deviate out of the line, that's another big deduction. If you have the other thing with the turns is stable upper body, so really quiet upper body, quiet hands, and what's the other one? So aggression, looking like you're attacking and aggressive. You're not hesitant or backing away. And also displaying control. So you want to be aggressive and fast, but you want to look in control while you're doing it. That's 60% of your score. The next 20% is your jumps. And similar to sports like gymnastics and diving, the tricks with a higher degree of difficulty mean that you have a increased opportunity to score higher. So the harder trick you do, the higher score you can get as long as you perform it well. So you have to decide whether you're going to go for an easier trick and do it really well, or go for the harder trick and risk it and try and get the more points. So that's one element. Your jumps are scored based on the technique and form in the air. Then it's also the amplitude and then the landing. And then you've got to display control from the landing into the moguls, back into the moguls again. And then the final element of your score is 20% goes towards your time or your speed. And that's calculated based on the pace set time, which is I think for women, it's 9.2 meters per second, and the men's like 10.8 meters per second. And then your time's multiplied by the pace set time to give you your turns, the speed points. So that's all the elements all together. So although
It's
it is,
not that straightforward, is it? It's
yeah. So even though it's a judge sport, there's definitely some, yeah, there can be bias and elements in there of subjectivity, but there is quite a strict criteria, especially for mogul skiing compared to other sports like free ride and big air sports, slope style. But of course, being a judge sport, you're always going to get frustrated when you don't get the score you want and then blame the judges. But again, kind of comes back to accountability and controlling and focusing on what you can control. That's something that you definitely learn being in a judge sport.
yeah, I'm curious about that because I've always felt that I would have a very hard time with a subjective. I had a hard enough time with a I guess when an objective sport like rowing has subjective elements like selection, it didn't bring out the best in me because it sort of brought out everything was a bit like fuck you, you're not gonna stop me. And when that's a judge, that's not the
Mm.
best juju. Um, is that something that you had to, if you're as competitive as you need to be to have done what you've done, is that something you just have to make peace with, or is that something that's still giving you the shits as you're going to your fourth
Oh,
fourth
yeah,
Olympics?
I mean, I now commentate mogul skiing as I love watching it. So I'm like, if I'm going to be up in the middle of the night watching it anyway, I may as well call it. And I watch it now, and I still get frustrated when I see the judging, and it's not the way that I think it should be. But yeah, I think like you said, it's something that you do need to make peace with when you're an athlete because it can really detract from the the focus on performance and on your own processes when you're out there. I think the only thing that you can do is, I was I nominated myself to be on the FIS Athletes Commission, so be a voice and represent the sport and the athletes, and then go through the appropriate channels. I think as Snow Australia, our national sporting federation, have always been really good in terms of making sure that we have representation on the judging panel and things like that, and running judging clinics in Australia and giving opportunities to people in Australia to become judges and be accredited both for the A and B licenses and judge internationally. So there's those elements as well. But yeah, there's always going to be times when the score that comes up is not what you want it to be. And I think you've kind of got to look at it again more objectively and go, is this just because I'm, my ego's hurt, or did I actually deserve a better score? So,
Yeah. Well, if you're a reasonable person, though, you're kind of dealing with the objective stuff logically, and then so you're just left with this part that does feel disputable, which you then can't do anything with anyway, other than accept. Like they're really
yeah,
the control the controllables.
yeah, and focus on the next event and go, okay, what are the judges actually looking for here? And then, yeah,
Are
use
the
that, I guess,
judges
as
people you
motivation.
know?
Some of them, not all of them, but yeah, some of them.
And are these conversations you could have? Like,
Um,
what am I working on here, Or is that
yeah, not obviously not at a competition. But yeah, there's like judges will go back to Australia, and they'll go back to all the coaches after the event and say, or even before the event, they say, this particular event, we're really looking for this, and this. And that'll be at the team leaders meeting, and then that'll get relayed back to the athletes as well. And then similar, maybe it's either at the end of an event or the end of the season, it'll be sort of a review process, same sort of thing. And then there's various judging clinics throughout the year where each nation will send representatives to go there, and they'll be running through footage on a screen, and they'll be judging it, explaining what they're looking for, and when they actually are taking deductions and why, and that kind of thing. So there is a lot going on, but I think there's always room for improvement. And I'm seeing that at the moment, actually watching a lot of the events this season is going, I think, we're at a point right now where we really need to see an uplift in capability of our judges internationally. And I really hope that they do that. But it's also an interesting time with advances in technology in terms of they've introduced remote judging. So judges are looking at a screen and they're not actually there on site. So that's also producing some challenges in terms of connection and whether or not the footage is zoomed in or it's all the way back and that kind of thing. So I think there's a lot of people at the moment, it's quite a big divide in terms of people going, I'm so against this remote judging, it's shit, it's terrible. And then I kind of see it as a thing of like, it's actually shit at the moment, but we probably need to go through this teething process to get to a point where it is actually awesome and it's better than where we are currently with judging on site. So
is the reason to do that to have higher quality judges at events they wouldn't otherwise get to, or I'm just trying to stretch myself for why?
You want to become a mogul skiing judge?
Well, if it's remote, I could just do it from here, right?
Yeah,
sat here on the floor with my laptop.
In your PJs, yeah.
Yeah, but what is the?
I think it's a cost cutting exercise, and I think it's a tricky one because I think there's not very many people who can judge World Cup level competition. So you're not picking from a big pool of people, and the people that do it, it's not their main source of income or their career. So are they really going to prioritize it, especially if it's remote and they're not getting to go to the actual location to judge? So yeah, I think it's a tricky one.
Yeah, that is definitely tricky. I've got two questions. One is silly, well, potentially silly. The second one is with was it knee, the range, what was the phrase?
Range of motion?
Range of motion.
Range of
Okay,
motion,
great.
yeah. Absorption, range of motion, yeah.
So is it that, what does that indicate if you have, like, I get direct, I get control, I get aggression, but range of motion is just what does that denote or convey, or what's the?
So it's part of the technique. If you've got good range of motion, then you are being aggressive. It means that you have nice timing in the moguls. It's similar to the leg splits and the form. It's a form thing. It's an aesthetic. So yeah, it's an
so you've
aesthetic,
got big moguls. You're going direct and fast, and your upper body's still, your
Hmm.
feet, knees, legs are together.
Yep.
And so to accommodate for the movement, you want tight turns and the knees are going to be moving significantly up and down. So the knees up and down is in the inverse and relative to the stillness of so a still upper body, you're going to get more knee travel.
Yeah, so that's actually the one of the hardest things about mogul skiing is being able to have a really stable upright spine and then great range of motion. And this is my theory as to why uh, Japan are so strong with mogul skiing is people of Asian ethnicity have the
What?
ability to, yeah, have an amazing squat and get that range of motion while still having a very upright spine. And I know that on the mogul skiing circuit, the Japanese are known for exceptional turns technique. And I think that's a really big part of it. It's also the reason that I did a lot of yoga as an athlete, and had to work on that because I naturally have a long femur in, relation to my calf and foot to knee. So it was really hard for me to have that upright spine while having full range of motion, but also my center of mass forward on
Yes.
the pitch. So
Yes.
I
Just so
had to
everyone
do the
knows, short
yoga to get
femurs,
there.
if you're in a squat, the length of the femur is going to influence the
Yeah,
position of the torso, such that
exactly.
someone, because if for someone that's watching this, if you're listening, you might be buggered, but if the knee's longer, the hip's going to be further back, so the torso relative to the center of mass is going to be further over, and if it's shorter, the
Exactly.
inverse is all true,
Yep.
which is
Yep.
why some people at the gym they squat and it's like to full depth and they're like, what's the problem with this? This is why can't everyone do this? Um, my second question, and I want to know more about the yoga and we're going to get there. Um, my silly question is why not infinitely baggy pants? Because if you've got baggy pants, then there's no gap, right?
Yeah,
And small
that
trade-off in
yeah.
speed.
Not a silly question. Our pants are really baggy. So that's yeah.
Yeah.
Why mogul skiers wear baggy clothes.
Okay,
Not
great.
not to the extent of like some of the slope style skiers, but yeah, you want a pretty baggy pants. And then yeah, similar. Like I actually had quite structured knee patches as well, so to almost like hold that position a little bit. Um, but yeah, this and similar sort of things. The colors that you wear as well. So I would always we had I'd have white gloves, white poles. You want to have stable upper body. If they're black and you don't have a stable upper body, they're flying around. It's really obvious to the judges.
Whereas they can get
Again,
lost in the snow a little bit.
yeah, yep, exactly. Like
And their
camouflage.
extremities are going to move more.
Yep,
Okay.
yeah. I usually competed with a white helmet. You also want to have you want to have it look like your head's moving really steadily down the hill as
Yeah.
well. So a white
Like a
helmet made sense
hurdler
as
with
well.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yep,
Okay.
exactly. And then yeah, I had always had white ski pants. So again, less um ability to be able to see any
But then the
micro
knee
gaps.
is
But then you want to highlight the knees. So
right. Okay.
yeah, and it people play with different things depending on their techniques as well. Like I know some people that maybe don't have as good knee angulation um, or that range of motion might not wear knee patches because they don't want to highlight that. Um, we also wore knee patches that were angled because that shows I did a year where we kind of tested different types of knee patches and angles and the height at which
Yeah.
they were on my knee and their angle made that look like I had better angulation as well. So there's all those little hacks, the 1%ers that you're trying to get as well.
Yeah. Which, given the stakes, makes perfect sense. And as you were, as the stakes were raising, things are getting more serious. Do you remember when you started? Because if you're from Falls, you're doing all these sports, but competing in sport and going to training is different than, and now I'm training for sport. Do you remember
Mm.
when you started, like, whether it was strength or working on maintaining these positions, when you started doing stuff off skis, basically to get better at moguls?
Yeah, I'd say the dryland training for me didn't really start until I got onto a team, and that was the Swiss team. So I was, I think, 13 when I was on, there's like a emerging talent athlete, was invited to do a couple of training camps with the Swiss team. So I went over to Perisher and did two.
Is there no VIS?
No, so the way the winter sports system works is that because there's not a huge talent pool of athletes, the Victorian Institute of Sport services the aerial skiing program, and the New South Wales Institute of Sport services the mogul skiing program.
Oh,
So yeah, just
cool.
the way
Okay,
it is
yeah,
with that.
cool.
Um, and yeah,
Actually
so I got
makes
into
more sense
NSWIS.
than
Yeah,
yeah,
I mean, we're never really in Melbourne or Sydney anyway, so it
yeah,
doesn't really matter in terms of accessing those
yeah,
facilities. It's just more around like optimizing funding and
yeah.
resources. But yeah, so first year of NSWIS was emerging talent as a 13-year-old, 13 turning 14. So I went over and did a couple of training camps over there with the NSWIS team. And that's where I actually first was exposed to the off snow training. So I got to see the NSWIS athletes, development team athletes training in the gym and doing testing, working out. I'd never really seen that before. I was like, wait, you guys don't just ski up and down the hill like a million times throughout the day? And they're like, no, we actually finish halfway through the day and then go down off the hill and go to the gym. Whereas I was used to just skiing until, my legs were cooked and I couldn't ski anymore and the lift was closed. So it was really cool to actually see some of the other stuff that they were doing. And I think those early stages was very fundamental, basic, just learning how to move and stack your body in a good position to do a squat, that kind of thing, and very general base level fitness. But yeah, it was interesting to
Do
be
you remember
exposed to
how
that
you
from a very
felt
young
about
age.
it? Like, did you
Oh,
like it?
I was like, these guys on the NSYS team are great skiers, and I want to be a really good skier. So
I'll do
they're
that.
doing it, then I better
Yeah.
do it. So yeah, it was. I thought it was really cool. And I think that's sort of to what we touched on earlier is, I talked about Elisa and her influence and feeling like something was within reach. This was like one of those other stepping stones along the way. So, I got to meet Elisa and see what was possible and that it was possible for an Aussie athlete, an Aussie female athlete to reach that level. And then once I was on the development team, I got to see what the pathway was to get there and all the
Yeah.
different stepping stones. And I was there in amongst it. I was training on the same courses as all these people, um, as a teammate with them now and getting to talk to them and see what it actually takes to get there. And that off snow training was a really big element. And having strength and conditioning trainers from the age of 13, 14 meant that I started developing my knowledge of strength and conditioning from a really young age as well. So yeah, that was that first exposure to that. But as a 13, 14-year-old, I think now knowing that that was 15 years ago, the sport has come a long way. And I think strength and conditioning um, has come a long way as well in terms of what we know is best for younger athletes. And perhaps we wouldn't, our sport wouldn't prescribe the same type of S&C training to a young 15, 14-year-old that was prescribed to me at that point in time. But I think that also just evolved throughout my career as well.
Has to be a interesting mix of attributes to train for moguls because there's a heavy gymnastics component, especially with the jumps, and it's got to be hard on the body. So you've got to a lot of it's got to be prehab, resilience building, and then what else are you like for a rower, for example, like strong power, injury proof. For it's sort of why you're in the gym. It's not necessarily to get as strong as possible, even if stronger is better. So is was strength still a goal? Like let's get stronger at these exercises.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Mogul such a hard sport to train for because, as you said, there's so many different elements. There's the acrobatic component, the turns, the jumping. I think probably first and foremost, it's such a high impact sport. So you have to be resilient in the sense of being able to sustain that level of impact, not just when you're landing jumps, but in the moguls. And as we were speaking about earlier, having that spine upright and the range of motion is really strenuous on your back. So strength is very important, both in terms of being able to um, withhold or sustain the forces that are coming at you, but also to be able to perform and have a good body position when you're skiing. Yeah, so strength is a massive component. Then you've got the element of speed. So having that fast range of motion.
Just to go back to strength, because
Also,
it's specific. Sorry, is it
yeah, yeah.
is it is force production like that? Because you still got to be able to apply power, but there's also just the ability to hold position, and they're both strength. But
Mm.
is force production still as important as for force absorption?
I think so in terms of different types of moguls. Like you may need to like hop from one bump to the other, or it's also important in the sense of uh, pressure off the jump. So we call it like pop. So you
Okay.
need to basically essentially pop off the end of the jump to maximize amplitude. So in that sense, there's that element as well.
Okay.
So yeah, landing it's that absorption, but when you take off the jump, it's that
So you have to
explosive
do
movement.
pop. You have to train pop for a thing that is 20% of the overall. So it's
Yeah,
still, man,
yeah,
tricky.
yeah,
And
yeah.
you got to do it all if that's the sport you want to do.
Yeah. But also
Um,
different shape moguls mean that you ski it in different ways. You might be focusing more on a yeah, active or a passive absorption, depending on how far apart the moguls are spaced and how deep they are, that kind of thing. So yeah, the technique that you're using when you're skiing them, whether you're going deep into the trenches or the troughs, or you're skimming along the tops of them, they also require different physical capacities as well.
and over time, you have a slightly different body. Like you understand the sport better and you develop attributes, but you also develop some wear and tear. And this is a thing, it's a moving target. And normally if I was talking to someone and they had if this were reverse and you're like, hey, let's talk about these two Olympic campaigns, I could kind of just go, well, here's how this one went and what we're expecting, and here's how this one went, and this is what we're expecting. And but for you, it's like a series of campaigns. Were you, by the time qualification for your first, there must have been a stage where it went from the next Winter Olympics, because you must have been 11, and that's not that you were just getting your feet wet, starting to take things seriously. And then at what stage in that quadrennium were you thinking this is a possibility, or was that just very close towards the end?
It was so close towards the end. I
Right.
did not expect to be in Vancouver at all. So I only ever competed in my first ever World Cup competition was the last qualifying event before Vancouver.
Oh shit.
So yeah, so that was my second first year on the team. Second year, if you included the talent idea year where I did a few camps with the team. And we were told, the whole NSWIS team were told, if you perform well in this local regional event in Utah, we'll give you a World Cup start in Deer Valley, Utah, which was a couple of weeks later. And I just was like, whoa, awesome opportunity to compete in my first ever World Cup. This is something that I was dreaming of. So immediately that became my focus and did all right in the regional event, enough to get me a start in my first World Cup. And I was just chuffed to be there. Like, this is a start. This is a first ever World Cup. I just want to put some runs down, clean runs. I remember sitting on the chairlift with the one of my favorite French mogul skiers at the time, and he was chatting to me, and he's like, "What are you doing here?" I was like, "That's my first ever World Cup." And he's like, "Oh, good luck, rookie." And I was just starstruck by all these athletes around me, and yeah, competed, did all right, put some runs down, and finished. You needed a top 30 to qualify Australia a quota spot, and I finished 29th. So I had no idea at the time what the qualification criteria was, what that meant. Jumped on a plane the next day. We went to Europe to compete on the Europa Cup circuit. So it wasn't even in my mind that I'd qualified. It wasn't until a couple of weeks later that my coach came to me and he was like, "Oh, so I'm going to need your measurements for team uniform." And I'm thinking, like, why do you need that? I've got my NSIS uniform. And then he's like, "Oh, we're going to the games." And I was just mind blown. Like 3 weeks later, I was on the plane to Vancouver to compete at my first Olympic Games. So I very much didn't expect to be there. It was just that my first World Cup event was right before the games, and I just snuck in there by like the smallest of margins. So
Crazy.
yeah, I just took it as an opportunity and ran with it.
Yeah. Did that help you have low expectations?
I
I
think
mean,
so. Yeah,
I don't say
I
low.
think so. Yeah,
Um,
not yeah, I know what you mean.
yeah.
The pressure that I was putting on myself
Yeah, exactly. No
in a way.
additional,
Yeah.
no one's expecting you to
Yeah.
do much of anything.
Yeah. More of just I've got nothing to lose but
Yeah.
everything to gain
Everyone's
in a
already
way.
happy that you're there because
Yeah,
you're the
yeah,
youngest on the
yeah. And
Australian team.
obviously, I wanted to do really well, but
Yeah.
this I was seeing this as a bonus. So I'd already had it in my head that I wanted to be competing in my first games in 2014. I would have been 19 at the time.
Yeah.
But this was like, well, I've got an opportunity to get my first ones out of the way, get the experience competing on this stage. I always in the back of my head at that point in time, my goal was to win an Olympic gold medal, and this was a stepping stone on the way to get there, and it just happened earlier than I'd expected, and that also meant that I was then readjusting my timelines as well.
Yes. So how did it go?
That games,
Yeah.
yeah, it went well. Like we were saying, I didn't have these. I didn't really even have time to think about the magnitude of it. I was just like, all right, I'm competing week to week on Europa Cup. All of a sudden, I'm at this next event, and yeah, there's a lot more hype going on around it. But I think the team and I did a really good job of just being like, when I click into my skis, it's all still mogul skiing. It's still snow under my feet, and I just do what I do every other day, and that's ski these bumps and left, right, a couple of jumps in between, and do it the best I possibly can. So finished in I think 27, no 20, I don't even remember 23rd, something like that. But put down a run that I was proud of, and
It's still,
was
if you're
then able
20
to
something, you were, and maybe there was a couple of countries that could have sent more than I'm just
yeah,
thinking
yeah.
you're right, but you're still,
No, I was 23rd. I would have been
yeah.
23rd. Yeah.
And so were you thinking at that stage, okay, it's 23rd, I want to be a gold medalist, but I'm also young, and so this is all feeling very reasonable
Yeah.
given the time that you have ahead of you. And as the games concluded and you're feeling, well, that was a bonus, so you're not going to get into the end of what you now know an Olympic cycle to be, which is a bit of a slog. And then there's some
Yeah.
like psychological unpacking and some reframing, and you
The
were just,
Olympic blues and
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. So you're just plowing ahead into the next cycle after
Yeah.
Salt Lake. And how are you feeling by the time that 2014 rolled around in terms of ambitions?
Yeah. So like, as you said, completely different experience for 2014. So after after Vancouver, I think I left those games again, like another um milestone where I was exposed to what it was going to take to get to the top. I got to see someone right there, one of my competitors, win an Olympic gold medal. I got to see how she trained, how she approached the training.
How did
Um,
that? Who was that?
so Hannah Kearney, a
Yeah.
US athlete, awesome skier, and I watched a lot of her training footage after that, and started to model my skiing and visualize my approach to skiing to be the way that she was performing. And my two coaches at the time were American, so they were also really big fans of Hannah Kearney's and the way she approached training and the way she skied, and were often sending me or getting me to look at her training
Yep.
footage. So I learned a lot from her. Um, she was one of those athletes that was incredibly strong in the gym. So being able to see that and go, all right, if she's strong, I'm going to need to be strong to be able to withstand the forces of these moguls and to ski the way that she does and to jump as big as she does. So that was also a really good learning experience for me.
So it's feeling more tangible.
Yeah, yeah,
If it was tangible beforehand, now it's feeling more
yeah,
believable. It's
yeah.
just
Or
there.
someone's there and they're doing it, and they're I don't. That's going to be the best piece of evidence that you need. So um, that's probably where my physical prep started to really ramp up and focusing more on that off snow training, and then
That was
started
in the
working.
you were living in the US at the time.
No, so technically living in Australia, but my coaches were American and
Right.
traveled with the Aussie
Okay.
team.
Okay.
We did do a lot of training camps in the US, but we're on the road so much. We were
Yeah,
never
you're a bit
really
of a
based
nomad.
anywhere. Yeah,
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 like you
living out
lived
of a
is sort of
suitcase.
a
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
What's that
yeah.
like?
So
Just to digress, is
yeah,
that just such a normal thing by the time you're doing it that you and such a necessity that you don't really second guess it? Because
yeah,
now
and
that's no longer the case, and it probably seems like you
different.
have the same curiosity that I do, which is like, or anyone else, which is, no, that's weird. And it certainly has its upsides to be able to travel the world and ski, but that might strike people as a definite downside because it's definitely not feeling settled, which is
Mm.
often what people strive for. And so is that like the judging just this thing that adds a facet of the sport? You either do it or you don't, and that's it.
Yeah, I think yeah, I especially with my sport, you've got to chase the winter. So you kind of acknowledge that if you're going to be a mogul skier, you're going to be away a lot, especially as an Aussie. We're not really known for having a lot of snow in Australia. So
Yeah.
um, yeah, chasing the winters and living out of a suitcase. I think what made it easier or more um, normal for me was the fact that my I was really close with my teammates and they were a similar age to me. So we basically grew up together because we were young. We were so young at this point in time that we grew up together doing this and traveling the world. So they're like my brothers and sisters essentially. So that made it easier. And I think again, being young, I didn't really know any different either. I didn't know what normal was.
Yeah.
And and then there's the element of education. So I was lucky that my school were pretty supportive. They provided me with work to take away up until I think it was about 10th grade. And then they were kind of like, oh, you're missing a lot of school. And they're like, it's probably not great for you. It's also probably not great for our teachers having to do all this extra work to create packages for you. And but they were rather than just being like, you got to stop doing that. They found a solution and they went and said, this is a distance education school. They can provide the work for you, and if you want to come in and come into the classroom and use the teachers as tutors, you can. So I think I did
If
that
we can
for
still say that you went to school
yeah,
here.
attended our school. Yeah, essentially. I think that lasted about a term and I ended up being away so much. I was like, I'm just going to do it myself anyway. And then my teammates were the same age, so they did the same thing, distance education. So it wasn't like we were isolated or in doing that. We were, we'd sit down after training at the dinner table and all do schoolwork together. And that kind of made it, I guess, more normal. But yeah, a lot of time away from family
Especially
was,
that
yeah,
age,
was
because that's,
challenging.
it's like a 15, 16-year old is that's that's not nothing. Those are formative years, but you're on a different path at that stage.
Yeah, I think I definitely was like I missed out on a lot of stuff. Like most of the people my age at that point in time, were going to parties and
How do you feel about
yeah,
that?
just that I am so okay with it. Like yeah, um, I think at the time when you're a teenager, like it's maybe a little bit difficult you kind of just feel like you don't really fit in. But I was so fine with it because I just felt like I had these dreams and ambitions that I was chasing, and I was around a community of people that had the similar interests to
Yeah.
me in terms of my teammates. And I just, when I went back to school, I just couldn't wait until the next training camp. So I'd be back away with them, with my team, with my people who all had similar ambitions. And I think, I don't know, I think I always knew, I always knew from a young age that that was what it was going to take. If I wanted to be the best in the world at something, I had to do things different to the general population.
Yeah,
And
you can't be abnormal. You can't do abnormal things and be normal. It's just not.
yeah, yeah. And I was just okay with that because I think, like I said before, I was exposed to that. I was exposed to athletes that were doing that. And I have memories of so I went to from year 7 to 10, I went to a boarding school, and I would get up early in the morning and go and run laps of the oval, or go to the gym, and I would do my plyometric session out on the oval. And
Any of the other girls doing that?
no, no,
Okay.
none of them. And they'd be sleeping in and getting up early to straighten their hair or whatever.
Okay.
But I was doing that, and yeah, like loading up my day before or after school with different training sessions. I remember one particular afternoon, I was out doing a plyometric session next to the cricket nets where there was a bit of a like a grassy hill, a grassy slope, and I was doing like leaps and bounds and bounding jumps and that kind of thing. And the boys that were in my grade were like laughing at me, and I was just like, oh, I kind of had just like, fuck you, like I'll show you. And then like 6 months later, I was at the Olympic Games. So, um, yeah, I think when
Good for
you
you.
grow up and you look back on it, you're just like, oh yeah, I'm glad I just kind of pushed through and did my own thing, really. So,
Good for
and
you.
now whenever I see young kids that are wanting to excel in their sport, if they're a little bit different or whatever, I guess I kind of try and take them under my wing and just say, go for it. Don't worry about these other kids because they're just going to be doing the same old thing, sitting in the classroom, doing what they do. So,
Yeah. I
mm.
there's that it can be a pull to, in at least some senses, be normal, even if you want to do special things, because assimilation for teenagers is not unimportant. I look at times when it would have been a house party or even at the pub or something at school, and had this sense of this is like a voice kind of whatever the teenage version of this is not in alignment with your goals. And just be like that
Mm,
the whole time I was out. So I'm like, do I either like participate because and if you don't, then it really pulls the guts out of it, and you may as well just go home, or you just have a strong enough sense of what's actually important to you, and then make decisions. So more and more, it would just be less and less of that, not because I begrudged anyone else for doing it, just because this didn't,
yeah,
yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
didn't
Yep.
feel like it was the best use of my time.
Yeah.
Um, you'd mentioned that, you'd had aspirations of not competing at the highest level, but being the best at the highest level. So after your second games in 2014, obviously by 2017, you're at the top of the sport. And did you feel like at that point in time, I'm the best in the world at this, or I had a good competitive year?
Uh, yeah, it's interesting because going into 2014, had a couple of podiums, so it's starting to get into that um level of being like consistently in a super
At
final,
World Cups?
sometimes on the yeah,
Yep.
a World Cup, sometimes on the podium. And then after 2014, like I mean, I already knew going before that games, like my goal was to be an Olympic gold medalist. I wanted that like more than I wanted to breathe. And I'd written it down, I'd visualized it, I'd, spent days and hours of um, performance psych and mental skills coaching working on that. So the day after the 2014 Olympic Games, went downstairs. So we were staying in a sub site, and went downstairs and had breakfast with my jump coach. And literally straight away, I said, I finished fifth yesterday. What do I need to do to get from here to number one? And that day after, we already started planning out the next 4 years of, all right, I'm gonna need to up my jumping, both in terms of the amplitude, but the skills that I do, the degree of difficulty. All right, we're gonna do way more water amping. So I'm gonna come over to Utah. We'll use the water amps over there in the summers, and you can bring it straight back on snow in Australia. And so we just went like all guns blazing.
You're like basically frothing at the
Going for
mouth.
that.
Like
Yeah,
ready,
yeah.
ready to go. Yeah.
Ready to go. Like I
Yeah.
know this is where I'm at. This is where I want to get to. It's not that far away. I'm fifth first. I
Yeah.
knew there was a lot of work to be done, and I knew that the level of the field would lift over that time as well. I knew first in 2014 was not going to be enough to get first in 2018. So there was a lot of work to be done. I was ready to go. My coaches were just as motivated and committed to the goal as I was, which was awesome. So they were showing up and putting in the level of effort and passion that I was every single day as well. So definitely grateful for that. And then yeah, come 2017 was almost like I going into that season, I was starting to have a few back issues as well. So that first World Cup of that year, the 2016-17 winter, I wasn't really sure where I was going to be at. That first event was just maybe hadn't done quite as much volume as I normally would leading into the season. And now looking back on it, that maybe that was actually great. That was maybe what I needed at that point in time. And then, yeah, won that first event of the season, was like, all right, we're on track here.
Yeah.
But yeah, when I finished that season, world champion and world number one, my mind was definitely not like, oh, I'm the best in the world. It was, this is a key element in my journey to get to that Olympic gold medal, and we're on track. But again, the day after those world championships, it was like, all right, what does this year look like? What training do I need to do to get to that point? And it's all go again.
Because as I was looking, at your competitive history, and then we've got this banner year in 2017, and your world championships are every second year, so year after and year before the Olympics. And now I'm like, that's the year before the Olympics. And then it begs the question, because I know that if there was an Olympic medal, then that would be in the bio too. And so and the obvious question is, well, what happened? And I want to
Yeah.
know, because it's not any one thing, but that season,
Mm,
if the season before finished on a high,
mm,
and you accumulated some ailments, you'd been doing a hard sport for a couple of quadrenniums at that stage, but
mm.
you're not thinking, I'm hanging on here. You're thinking, we're charging ahead for that season. And then how did the season go prior to the games?
Yeah. So great question. What happened? Um,
I say that
still,
as with my own versions of what happened as well.
yeah, I know.
Yeah.
I feel
Yeah.
like I can speak candidly with you on this one.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, it's still I still ask myself that question very regularly, and there's probably multiple different answers to it. First and foremost, I would say like I wasn't the best person. I was not the best athlete skiing that run in the Olympic final. But yeah, going back, um, yeah, to that year of training, we did massive amounts of S&C volume to start the year. Slightly different approach. We pretty much started that year with a massive, essentially like a boot camp. It was kind of a bit of a different strength and conditioning approach to what I'd had the year before. And I was, yeah, basically my coaches had said after the games that like, this is what we need to do. It's a really big focus. We need to just have your body performing like a machine to get us set up for the year. So we went in, did that massive training camp to start the year back at the VIS in Australia and in Victoria, and then went into just pre-season training camp over in Whistler, trained turns camp over there, then to water ramping over in Utah. Again, massive amount of volume on the ramps there, jumping back on snow in Australia. My back started flaring up a bit again, so was kind of caught between wanting to do more volume on snow, but my body not really letting me. And then going at that point in time as well, I was world number one, so I had a really good team around me of the best physio in the system for winter sports, the best team doc, best coaches, best S&C trainer, that were all really wanting to make sure that I was okay to be able to train on snow and do the best to the best of my ability, but perhaps weren't aligned on what the best approach was for that. So I had lots of different pieces of information coming at me. I went with kind of defaulted back to, okay, what's my two on snow coach is telling me. And that sort of became the source of truth for me. I went with that. Upon reflection, I probably should have taken a bit more ownership and gone with, okay, I'm going to look to the people that are experts in the particular areas that they're advising me on. Anyway, probably overcooked myself going into the season. I did start that first event of that year, so Rooker, with a win again. So I was like, all right, I'm in the ballpark here. I'm not quite as sharp as I was last season, but it's definitely
You could
achievable.
feel that just because you hadn't as much snow time.
Yeah, I think I was also really stressed mentally. Not because I wasn't feeling physically fit, more because I was unsure and unsure about the team around me. Everyone telling me different things and constantly questioning, am I doing the right thing? Am I doing the right amount of volume today on snow? Am I doing the right type of S&C? It was just this constant battle of, am I doing the right stuff, and not really being confident in my approach. And upon reflection, the best thing probably would have been for me to go like, all right, whatever approach it is, doesn't matter whether it's A, B, or C, whichever one it is, I'm buying into it 100%, going with that. And everyone on my team is going to buy into that as well. Instead, I felt very scattered. And
And then
obviously the
maybe you
close,
said you like set the tone for the team, like, "Hey, this is what we're
yeah,
doing." Yeah.
yeah, taken ownership of my program rather than kind of just being guided by people around me, and wanting someone else to find the answer for me. And then, yeah, so won that first event. The next event after that, I'm trying to think which one it was next, was I think I had a third place or something. My coaches freaked out. They're like, hang on, this is you're not at the top. We're going to cut you from the last event before the games, and you're going to do an S&C camp instead. This is something that has never ever happened in my career before. You do an S&C camp before a major competition. Usually, you'd be skiing in the lead up to it. And so again, didn't trust where my body was at, didn't trust the process. I felt like all the training and prep we'd done was out the window. My brain was scattered. Then I started after I knew that was the plan that my coaches were putting in place, I started questioning my skiing and was just not skiing like myself. The results started to dwindle from there going into the games. Did that S&C camp, and then just had a couple of days on snow before we headed to the games. Once I got there to the games, started skiing okay again, but definitely wasn't feeling confident and sharp like I was going into the World Champs the year before.
Man, I feel that. It's like you think in an individual sport that it's just an individual and their performances are reflective of their performance and their preparation, and that is true, but it's not, you're not the locus of all control, and you have all these service providers, and for you to have any faith in their reason for being able to help you, you have to put some stock in their opinions.
Mm,
Can't put all stock in all their opinions, especially when there's some conflict. And I
mm,
would say the most important thing that an athlete can have is belief in what they're doing.
100%. Yeah.
Like no
Sometimes it's
program
not
works
even,
without
yeah,
belief in it.
yeah, yeah. And being completely bought into that all in and then you just charge and go. But like I think it's important that I state that I take full responsibility for my performance in Pyeongchang and what I did there. And there's so many different ways I can look back on it and go, I wish I did that better. I wish I did that better. And yeah, I think yeah, I've
I
done
don't
that
see any part of it where you're
many
trying
ways.
to escape control because you still think in terms of, well, there's more I could have done, even with people where we weren't aligned, I could have done more to get us all on the same page. And you can only get that sometimes in hindsight. Either you do it at the
Mm,
time or hopefully you learn. Learning is better than that not being the case. Then
100%. Yeah.
right.
I know
And
there's so much I've learned out of that here.
yeah,
And
yeah.
like, both for me as an athlete, but me as a person and taking ownership and um, trusting myself as well. And I think that's something I did more towards the back end of my career is knowing I've been in this for a long time and I know a bit about mogul skiing. I know a lot about my body and what I need to perform well, and definitely tried to use that more and towards the tail end of my career. But yeah, I think for me to be at least able to find some peace in 2018 was probably going, all right, well, I've been able to learn from it. I take responsibility for it. I also did the best that I could with the information that I had at the time and what I knew at the time. And all I can do now
And
is,
with what personal skills you had at the time as
yep,
well.
yep,
You don't have the
exactly.
experience until you have the experience. I
Yep.
just have this shit on your behalf because we're walking along and when you know it's not a lack of talent, but that there was just the preparation was
Yeah,
funky.
yeah,
And as soon as you said, "Hey, we did this thing we'd never done before," and I'm like, "Holy fuck, this is not a good start," because you don't want that in an Olympic year. That's kind of
yeah. Well, it's that, but it's also the fact that, you're there in a room hearing your S&C coach arguing with your physio and your on snow coach about it as well. So um, yeah, definitely like lack of trust in what you're doing going into that. It's not just the fact that they put in the program something different, but that you knew that they weren't aligned on it. So
yeah, yeah. You know that, and then you have to go out and do the
and do it
thing, and it's not
anyway.
feeling good, and then you still have to do it anyway.
Yeah,
Yeah, and most people don't know because they just see underperformance at the end, and they don't have
yeah,
all of this context. Like
yeah,
in Beijing, same thing. The result, I'm at least one ninth of it. Because you're in a boat with eight other people.
yeah,
As a coach, I'll take my 10%. I'll take more than that, just for everyone to feel good. But I mean, our fin fell off in the heat. My
yeah.
first race at the Olympic Games, our fin fell off. I've never had that happen in a race before, ever. Not
I've
since.
never heard of that happening in rowing. Does that happen very often?
No. No, so rarely, only when you're messing with the fin, which evidently someone was not nefariously, but let's try and do something with it that it hasn't been done before. Because then when you kind of just need to show up with, we know this works. We're not, that can't be the incremental thing we're trying to rely on in order to perform. And evidently we were, and that was more of a symptom of where we were at. And, we're not here to talk about my campaigns, but all campaigns that don't end in the way as hope, they all have some version of this. Everyone's got some story, and ideally, everyone has some version of responsibility. But if you go in there with medal aspirations that are realistic, and then you leave without medals, then well, there's some delta between what
Yeah,
happened and what you wanted to happen, and then there's usually a reason for it. So, yeah, that sucks. That's just
Yeah.
shitty,
And I
shitty.
think like I'm interested to hear how you've, the reasons that you found for that day in Beijing going the way that it did. But I mean, I'm assuming like a fin falling off is out of your control, right?
It is, and even that would a coach would. You've got a coach and an eight. You've got the Cox, whose responsibility between the coach, the Cox, and the boatman that they have control for that. It'd be like that's a Formula One car and you've got mechanics. So the driver's not going, hey, is the tire
Tire pumped up.
right or
Yeah.
attached to the car, all these essential things.
Yeah, yeah.
And by the time that it happened, we were then in the repechage where it's six boats, top four go to the final, or maybe top two go to the final, and everyone else it's like get out of here. So that's becomes the next most immediate important thing. And then you're dealing with that. And we came second. We qualified for the final, and then you're trying to make the most of it. But we were off, and so we just got spat out of the back of the final, and then it's just a series of, well, what went wrong? And it's any number of 1,000 things that have led to that point in time. And the thing that, the following year, I was the only person in the crew that was rowing the next year. Everyone else retired or was taking a year off. Some instances, quite rightly, James Tompkins, for example, was in that crew. It's his sixth Olympic Games. So
Yeah.
imagine what it was like for him for this to happen. He's cool as a cucumber, though, so you never know if he was even bothered by it. I'm sure he was bothered by the result in the end. We all were, but you'd have the campaign, and then I was like you, I want to make this right. All sorts of optimism and all sorts of willingness to be prepared to put in the work. And, and then they bring in new head coach, new assistant coaches, new director of performance. And then I remember having a meeting with a collection of these people, and they're a bit like, yeah, so what went wrong with the campaign last year? Because no one else is here to even, but
Yeah.
not like, hey, so we can understand it better so it doesn't happen again, but almost like, what did you do?
That yeah, everyone wants to point a finger
Yeah, and I'm
and
like,
blame.
okay, well,
Yeah.
I'll take my 10%, but I can't be that thin part. And maybe when we did that camp on in Brisbane River that was tidal, that made no fucking sense. Like it was
Yeah.
we did some heat training that
Yeah.
I have
But you don't
halfway
know
through
anything.
heart issues. That probably wasn't great. Like that's not, but no
Yeah.
one. So
I even remember having a conversation after those games. My coach, like, I think my coaches were probably just as devastated as I was, but um, probably made meaning out of it in different ways as well. I think that's what people do is they to try and cope, they make meaning, and like that's why I find it so interesting with you. Your this example that you're speaking about with eight people in the same boat. Do you all come away from that with the same meaning like of
no,
why did that happen with everyone we're actually creating these meanings to cope with it or to feel better about ourselves or to move forward. And so I'm like I constantly question myself when I'm going, oh, why did that happen, like what could I have done differently, like all the what ifs is like, am I doing that as a coping mechanism or am I actually analyzing it for what it was?
both.
So yeah, interesting to hear about how that was for you with eight people in the same boat.
Yeah, I mean, you're in the same boat, but everyone's got their same experiences. I mean, there are different experiences leading up to that. So, for James Tompkins, who'd won three Olympic gold medals, it didn't finish the way that he wanted, but there's some consolation.
Mm.
Like, I'm not shit at the Olympics. I can't be because look at all this. But for some of us,
Yeah.
I'm like, well, I feel pretty shit at the Olympics. It's like, this is like in any other context, this would be such a terrible result that I'd be able to live with myself because I had to, but this is what I do professionally, effectively. I put all my chips on this, which perhaps isn't on balance, the best strategy would probably know that now with sports psych is like have hobbies. So this isn't your only thing,
Yeah.
but I took it seriously. And for me to take something serious, I don't dabble. I'm all in to be in it all. And but elite sport is this is the way it goes. And
Mm.
at this stage, both you and I went for another cycle because there's still self-belief, there's still belief in the support around you that there's more good than bad. So you give it another roll of the dice. And what were you thinking after, like if you remember in 2014, you're at breakfast, you're like the following day, and after the season finishes, the games don't go the way that you want, which quite fairly were with the highest aspirations you could have for your sport was that season. So it's all the way up here, which means you've got all this space to be unfulfilled.
Mm.
How are you feeling leading into the next campaign?
Yeah, it was yeah, like extremely different. The next day at breakfast was not the same as it was 4 years before after Pyeongchang. Yeah, a lot of tension with like the people that had expectations on me, and then obviously the ones on myself. And this was the moment that I'd
What did
been
you
dreaming of.
come?
Fifth,
Yeah,
so it's
fifth,
same
fifth again. Yeah,
fifth, but with a massive
yeah, yeah.
mistake. Um,
Okay,
so same place as
yeah.
4 years
The scene's
before.
fifth, but the stories.
Yeah, the runs are
Yeah, yeah.
completely different as
Okay.
well. Yeah, so it was interesting for you to talk about that there about being all in. Like I was all in from the age of 8. Like I knew that I, to be, if you want to be excellent at something, you kind of like this idea of balance. Like you can, like I don't know how I feel about it, but I'm so glad that I didn't have a balanced life as a young athlete. Like it's probably not what people these days call healthy, but I was able to achieve some great things in my sport. It wasn't to the complete level that I wanted to, but like I look back on it now and I'm so proud of what I did achieve in my sport, but also, yeah, I freaking love mogul skiing and I got to do it for my job for like 15 years. So yeah, I'm kind of stoked that I didn't have a
Yeah,
what
yeah.
stereotypically called
You
balanced
won.
life. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. Yeah, so that also comes with the consequences of that is I put all my eggs in one basket that, I didn't have these other hobbies or, identity outside of being a mogul skier. Which, we talked earlier about making meaning, and that night after the Pyeongchang games, I'm really close with my older brother. He was a mogul skiing coach, so we have that shared interest, and he's obviously played a pretty big role in being a support person for me in my career. And he messaged me and he was like, I know this probably feels like the shittest moment of your life right now, but he's like, honestly, this is like in the grand scheme of things for you as a human, this is actually you're going to come out of this okay, and this will actually be a good thing. And I was thinking like, oh, that's the last thing I want to fuck you like, but now um, an Olympic cycle later, plus some, I can see what he actually meant out of that. And that was that it forced me to develop a sense of identity outside of Britt the mogul skier. And I'm still very happy that I was all in as a skier. But now looking back on it, I'm like, I've then, and now as a retired athlete, being able to develop myself and my sense of identity outside of the sport has meant that I now am able to um, feel more fulfilled as a person and when I'm not mogul skiing every single day.
yeah.
But that it didn't happen overnight. I woke up from the games the next day after Pyeongchang and I was like, it felt like the rug had been ripped out from under me because I had been planning for that moment my entire life. I didn't know what my life looked like after that day because I'd just visualized up until that point. So it felt like very like I don't know the words to describe it, but like the very unstable. Like my true north was gone, because I'd had a very fixed goal with a timeline, and now that was no longer there. And I'm like, well, do I now just move the goalpost? Do I stretch it out and go for gold again? And I think in the back of my head, that was what I was thinking, because that was everything that I'd kind of planned. And so, I did just extend that out. Um, but I also mentally like completely unraveled, because I think it did show me that, you know, I hadn't achieved everything that I wanted to. And because I had put all of my eggs in one basket, my entire sense of self-worth was wrapped up in that of, when I achieve X, I will feel fulfilled and be happy. And I didn't achieve that, so I didn't feel that. So then had to go through this process of really separating my performance and what I wanted to achieve as an athlete with my, from my self-worth. And a really key part of that was changing my support team around me, working with people that trusted me as a person and trusted my experience in the sport, asked me what I was thinking and wanted to hear what I had to say. So I switched coaches for that last Olympic cycle, and we did things quite differently. I also did a few things different with my physical prep, took a bit more ownership around my training. That was when I really started to do a lot more of the yoga that got me through my last Olympic cycle with my back.
When did you start with yoga?
So I practiced what most people know as yoga, like the Vinyasa yoga, probably since for the age of about 19, 20. But after Pyeongchang, my back was really bad. I ended up going to see this guru guy. His name's Duncan, and he was recommended to me by Lydia Lassala. So she was a
Mhm.
Olympic gold medalist in sport of aerial skiing. Um, I'd heard a lot about him. My teammate Brody Summers had also been to him when he'd had back issues that he wasn't able to fix in any other way. And I thought, oh, I already practice yoga. I know what this is all about, and why would I go to this guy? My coach eventually convinced me to go, and like it just completely transformed my body. His style of yoga is quite different to what most frequently in Australia at the moment, and it's very much a one-on-one practice where he's adjusting you physically and moving your body. It's a lot more focused on like mobility as opposed to actual just flexibility, that kind of thing. And all of a sudden, I was able to get that range of motion with my hips and the bumps that I wasn't able to get previously, and back pain went away, all this kind of thing. So yeah, it was a great find, and a nice little weapon in the toolkit
How
that
long
I
did
used to
that
get me through.
process take to notice the benefits?
Couple of weeks, I would say, of going to him very consistently, and then he actually gave me like a program to take away with me when I was on snow, and I do literally do that every single morning. Didn't miss a morning for like 3 years or something until the day after the 2022 Olympic Games, but
Wow.
every morning religiously, and I think that was really important, that I did that. I also had my coaches would come in with me and look at the way he was adjusting me. They learned how to do the adjustments, so they could do that with me in the morning before I go on snow as well. So yeah, that was a really key part of that last Olympic cycle for me.
So you've got this evolution of moguls, but also an evolution of yoga because it was serving some purpose and seemed
Yeah,
like
yeah,
if you started when you were 19, 20 and know what I now know about how you pursued moguls, it was you would have been doing it because that'd help. Like I'm doing
yeah,
it so this will help
yeah.
me. And so did you think range of motion and like flexibility, stability when you started? Were you thinking in those terms of like this is
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. I think I'd attended a yoga class, and I thought, oh, yeah, this was really good. It's probably going to help my skiing. More as a like recovery prehab type tool, and quickly learned that there was actually a bit more to it, in terms of like the non-physical practice, or the not the asana side of things, but the breath work and meditation. And I also started incorporating that into my training as well. So I think that just kind of happened by chance of being like, oh, this actually, there's some stuff in here that can be really useful for me, on snow, and also really enjoy this. So I'd say I'm kind of probably consider myself a student of the sport. So I was always looking for those one percenters, and these were, I loved anything to do with mental preparation and mindset. And this was a really big part of that. And I think I did notice when I got back on snow after doing a lot of this stuff, in the times I was off snow, that when I got back on snow, I was able to get into that flow state and that zone a lot faster when I was using these techniques that I learned in the yoga studio. So that was more in terms of that studio yoga
Yeah.
setting, and then the stuff with Duncan was more about the body and the physical prep.
What's it for anyone that's curious, and it might be that this guy is the one guy that can implement this type of yoga, and but or is something that's a bit more accessible than that?
Uh yeah, mate. I mean,
Give him a
he's
shout
a
out. How do
yeah,
people?
Duncan Ewing. He's not the kind of guy who's on social media or
Okay.
anything like
Yeah,
that. Like he's basically like this old rundown shop front. You don't even realize there's actually a room in their studio, but um, he's awesome, and he just loves working with his clients. He works with people who are like corporates or whatever, and sitting at a desk all day, and then he works with athletes. I've seen a few athletes from the AFL in there. I think my AirPods just died. Um, yeah, so awesome guy. He came over to Finland with the team one year. I think Lydia brought him over there, completely out of his element, but yeah, he loved it, and it was good to have him on snow.
yeah, good and good. It seems like if your coach was pointing you in that direction, this is a different approach, and it feels like for at least the last cycle, you had a bit more ownership of which there's this thing with special operators in a military setting where they have less incidents of PTSD because they have more ownership over their missions. So instead of infantrymen or Marines where they just like go over there and die, they're they're determining the strategy and the implementation. So even if things go tits up, they can live with it better.
Mm. Yeah, definitely.
Does that have any parallel for your last cycle in that it was on your own terms?
100%. Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. I didn't know that about like the military, but that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, had more ownership, was working with a different coach who I think also just was younger female, so we were able to relate on a different level that I hadn't experienced with coaches before. And no disrespect or no discredit to my previous coaches, but I think this was the best thing for me at this point in my career and my development, both as an athlete and as a person. And also think someone that just really likes to continue to learn, like a growth and learning is a key value of mine. And I think this was a really important part of that, is kind of that coach relationship that I had the previous 3 Olympic cycles, had gotten to a point where I didn't feel like I was growing and learning and switching things up, and working with Katie, my coach for the last Olympic cycle, was I now look back and I'm really happy with that decision, and learn a lot from her in very different ways, very different style of coaching. Was someone who would sit down with me and get the training footage up from the day. We'd do video analysis, and the first thing she'd say was like, okay, what do you think? I'm looking at that. What were you feeling? And then we kind of workshop it together. And I really enjoyed that, and learning more about my skiing in that way. I think that brought out some better skiing in me that I maybe otherwise wouldn't have got in that last Olympic cycle. And yeah, like you said, taking ownership and working with an athlete, sorry, a coach who
also knew that there were those demons from the previous Olympics that I needed to address as well and start to develop my identity outside the sport. And she was supportive of that as well. Was really important. And
What did that look like as you were preparing? Because you still have to be serious as a heart attack, but then you need to do this thing to not have it feel as serious as a heart attack.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think, yeah, so many different things. Just putting myself in situations and having experiences that were different and that made me uncomfortable. I also felt like I got to a point in my skiing, like mogul skiing is so much a sport where it's mind over matter. You can be the fittest, the strongest, have the best technique, but if your headspace is not in the right place, none of that means anything. So getting myself into a place where I felt really confident in myself and my decisions meant that I needed to kind of address some of those things outside of mogul skiing and develop as a person, become, I think, a bit more of a bit. I needed to become more mature. And I think my coach at the time, she actually realized that as well. And so it wasn't a matter of just being like, oh, I'm slacking off on training or whatever like that. It's like, no, this is actually part of it,
Yeah.
making me a better athlete. Um, and yeah, so just exposing myself to different things. I know that I actually performed better and trained better when I was studying at the time, because it just did give me time to switch off. I think I easily just get home from training and just want to watch footage and analyze that. And I'd get home on days and she'd be like, "No, Britt, just go and read a book or whatever. Like you need to actually switch off,
It's
so that you
tricky
come back
when
fresh."
you feel
Yeah.
like, fuck balance and
Mm.
but also
It was a hard thing for me to sort of understand, and it took me a while to get there, being like, oh, but I should be doing more training. I should be watching my footage, and her being like, no, this is actually you need to rest so that you're fresh for tomorrow's training.
yeah, it's a good on-off switch.
Mm.
It's pretty useful, and those of us that are on incline, that can some like everything can feel like life and death because you're raising the stakes, and every day is you're fighting because it's all more combative than it needs to be, as opposed to here's this thing I do it at a very high standard, I take it very seriously, but when you raise the stakes higher than they already are, then it makes sense that the event that's coming is going to feel even more significant than it already is. So you were working on your headspace and your approach in that cycle. How are you feeling going into 2022 games?
Yeah, well, there was the probably like if I think about some events that were chapters in that cycle was so first World Cup season competing with Katie at coach, first event back out there with the podium, the best result I'd had in over a year and best skiing I'd ever done in a competition. So,
It's not small.
pardon?
It's not no
Yeah,
small thing.
yeah. And I
Yeah.
like that night was a night of mogul skiing that I'm very proud of. And I remember like I still enjoy watching that footage because I was super proud of the skiing that I did, but also how my runs improved run after run, which is throughout the course of competition, even the training runs in between. It's really hard to make those big changes during competition. So I was really proud of that event. Went to the next event in China and had a crash in competition. I don't remember it. So
Not
the
a good sign.
no, no,
Yeah.
no.
Yeah,
Um,
okay, shit.
yeah, broken clavicle, six ribs, knocked myself out. Woke up in a Chinese hospital, and then had to spend a couple of days over there until I was okay to fly home. Katie stayed with me that whole time and looked after me, and we all the World Cup tour had left, and we had to liaise with locals who didn't speak a word of English to figure out how we could actually make our way back to Beijing from this tiny town in northern, like 4 hours north of Beijing in the mountains. And we got back to Beijing, got a flight home, and then I had surgery once I got back home. But that was right sort of as COVID.
On your clavicle.
Yeah, yep. So I had a hook plate put in.
And what year was this?
That was December 2019 going
Yeah.
into
Okay.
2020. So I think I had surgery on Christmas Eve, and that meant I had to sit the rest of that season out. So had a good start to the season, then I had to sit it out. So spent that the next couple of months just rehabbing and physical prep. I was still able to do quite a lot of strength and conditioning. So
And then were you pretty much into the pandemic by then?
yeah, so the day I think like I had a hook plate put in, which meant that the surgeon actually bent the plate a bit, so I was able to get more range, because in mogul skiing or jumping, you need to be able to get range of motion, have your arms up above your head. So he bent it so I could get that range. So I was still able to train on the trampoline and in the bungee. But I did have to have the plate removed 12 weeks later. That he said that was the shortest amount of time that he'd do for me. Got the plate taken out just before we went into that very, very first lockdown. And it was where they were starting to get a little bit iffy about elective surgery. And I just managed to squeak that one in there. And then we set up a home gym. I moved in with my coach at her house, and we set up a gym in her backyard, and did the rehab and prehab in there.
And then when could you start competing again?
So that was like April that year. March, April had the plate out. Then we came out of that first lockdown, started doing some water ramping in Lilydale in Melbourne, and then the whispers of the next lockdown and the border closure, the state border closure were happening. So we threw our stuff in a car, jumped in the car across the border, because we knew that we wanted to be training in Perisher for the Australian winter. So we got up there, trained on snow, and that was the first time back on snow after the collarbone. But I felt like I'd had a really good period of S&C prep in the lead up to that. So I was confident once I got back on snow, and that was fine. Then, yeah, had obviously a really strange year with dodging lockdowns and trying to get to different training locations before we headed overseas for the World Cup season.
World Cup season of 20 or 21?
Yep, 2021.
21.
20 and 21, yep.
And then how did that go?
That was interesting season. I don't think I was at the level that I wanted to be at. We're still kind of, I think, finding my feet again, getting back into the zone of competing, and actually had a few reasonable results in there, like finals, but definitely not at the level that I wanted to be at. But again, using that as information and kind of looking at it as well. Now I'm going into the Olympic year with a lot lower expectations in terms of the expectations other people had of me, but also just only room for improvement, and knowing now I've got this season of knowing where I'm at, what I need to work on going forward, but also having a team around me that I really trusted and was working on going forward. In that space of time, that the sport was starting to change a lot too, and progressing probably at a rate faster than I was as well, and was thinking I'm going to need to actually do higher degree of difficulty to be able to be in the mix and perform well at the next game. So I started working on some different tricks and on the water ramp in the lead up to the 2022 games. And then, yeah, was doing them on snow in July, August of 2021 going into that year. But then we kind of got to a point with Katie and I looking at something we spoke about earlier in this conversation of the degree of difficulty of, do I push the degree of difficulty and go for those harder tricks that are higher risk and more chance of me fucking it up and blowing the whole run? Or do I go with another trick that I know I can do well, but ski into the jump really fast, jump big, and I'm confident at doing? And we eventually landed on the fact that it was going to be better for me to go for that speed, jump big. It was still a different trick, a different type trick combination to what I'd done at the previous games as well. So there was that there, but also just given the timeline, I think if I didn't have the collarbone injury, I would have had more time to develop those tricks, the higher degree of difficulty. So it was more like, all right, these are the cards I've been dealt. This is going to be the best approach. And then that's what we went with. But it was very much her giving her professional opinion to me and then saying, all right, this is what I think. What do you think and what do you want to go with? And she said, whatever you want to go with is I'll be on board and we'll go for it, because she knew that my experience at the last games was one where I didn't feel like I had that ownership and wasn't confident in the way going forward. So definitely grateful that I had that collaborative approach into those games, and it meant that I felt like I was really bought into the approach, and so was she.
Did you feel like outside of your immediate team, which was going to back you in, that given the prior couple of cycles when you had a little bit more momentum performance-wise, that came with expectation, but also, I don't know, I used to like going in as a favorite or with expectation because you get more favorable treatment within the context of the team. The other side of that, it comes with more pressure. Did you feel like they were like, okay, great, that's Britt over there. We're not backing her that much, but we won't stand in her way. Is that kind of the vibe?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, actually it was like that. And we used to have well, I'm sure it's probably still the case on the Aussie mogul team, is the highest ranked athlete at that point in time and gets, the best room in the ACOM on tour. They get to sit in the front of the car, like special treatment to that
Yeah.
level.
Okay.
And I was like, well, Jakara, my teammate, she was performing the best. You get the best room, and I respected that because I got that when I was performing the best as well. And I'm like, yep, you deserve it, so you go for it. But yeah, I think I just again just focused on what I was doing and my performance every single day. And if it meant that I didn't get my own room, then so what? So
Yeah. And did you go into those games thinking, okay, this will be my last, or this might be my last, depending on how it goes? Or did you have any clarity?
no,
No.
because I was so just focused on those games and wanting to perform really well there. I didn't put any timeline on my retirement. I had actually not put much thought into it at all, other than that I was going to eventually retire at some point and that I'd studied and made sure that I have something else to go on to. But I definitely hadn't made any decisions. And I think that was a really good approach for me. I was just like, okay, I can be in Beijing completely focused on my skiing and not be in the start gate thinking, oh, this might be the last time I ever push out of the start gate. So I'm happy with that and that decision. And then when I got home, still was unsure. And I think initially I was like, yeah, I think I'm going to go for at least another year, maybe another Olympic cycle, because I thought, oh, I've got those tricks that I've done them on snow, but I haven't done them in competition. That'd be a really nice goal to tick off. But I think that was something that I was telling myself because I was a little bit afraid of the unknown and what life looked like without mogul skiing. And yeah, didn't have a lot of clarity on what I was going to do after I retired as well. And then slowly that clarity started to surface, and all of a sudden I realized that I was just telling myself that I'm just gonna go for those new tricks, do at least another year, competed on snow, because I didn't really know what else to do, or
Yeah.
didn't have that sense of direction or true north that I was speaking of earlier.
And then on the other side, which is the rest of your life, but when you've had such a significant chunk of time, it gives you also an opportunity to do things you've not been able to do before. And for some people, that might be, they spend it, like for me, my 20s is basically rowing. There's a uni degree at the start of it. So it wasn't just rowing, but that was most of what I was doing. But yours extended, your half your teenage years were invested in the sport, and then all your 20s. Were you looking forward to doing something different with your body, or were you looking forward to giving it a rest?
Uh that's Yeah, good question. Not definitely not giving it a rest. I was looking forward to doing something different with my mind.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, challenging my mind in different ways. Like as I said earlier, like learning and growth is key value of mine, and I definitely use my values as, you know, the way I make decisions about what I do with my time. And um, another key value of mine is like health and physical fitness, mental health and physical fitness. And I love training. I love moving my body. And there was a bit of a joke around my team when I retired that I wasn't really retired because I was still training just as much as I was when I was still an athlete. I think I just shifted modalities and switched the competitive itch to focus on a few different things. And that has actually been really fun. It's been fun going back to being a novice at different sports or going to the beginning and the rate of progression being much faster than everyone.
Yeah.
At the end of my career as a mogul skier, where you're trying to make these 1% gains that take weeks or years to make, to going to being a beginner and just being like, it's like you've turned around and the goals are like right in front of you. So that's been fun, but also, yeah, interesting to learn and challenge myself in different ways.
The best thing about not being great at something, if you're terrible, then there's just so much scope for improvement.
Yeah, there is.
Yeah.
But then you're armed with all this knowledge of your own sport and what you've done and
And
knowledge
how
of
to prepare
your
for sport.
body. Yeah,
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 yeah, yeah.
yeah, your body. And also access to people that know a lot about these things as well has been really good. Like I still have great um relationship with my strength and conditioning coach, and we'll pick his brains on different things. And I'm like, oh, this is awesome. I'm doing these club level community triathlons and getting coaching advice from the coach of the Olympic gold medalist. So
Yeah, yeah, that is not normal.
yeah.
But good for you. Do you find that you could, if your measuring stick is best in the world and that's the aspiration, then you've got something where that's not it. Did you have any issue with that?
I definitely had to, yeah, I think it's been interesting because I think I've looked at these way more as like personal goals rather than trying to beat everyone around me like I was in as a mogul skier. Is, what are my personal goals with this? And obviously had personal goals in my own sport, but it's very different. I'm not looking at trying to beat everyone that I'm out there against because I know I've just started this sport or whatever. And I know I've got different priorities in my life as well. Like, as we were saying earlier, like my sport as a mogul skier, I was all in, absolutely all in. I know now I work a 9 to 5, so I can't have those same expectations on myself competing in a community level triathlon that I've
Oh, this is all very reasonable, but
no, my preparation for it. So
you could be someone else that has all that, and then because I know plenty of Olympians that would say, well, that's true. You've got less training time. I'm aware that all these people that are better than me and should be better than me got different priorities. I got a 9 to 5 job, and yet they're still like a psycho. So
yeah,
they're like, they still have to consciously work through
yeah,
compartmentalizing what they're doing or treat it like you might be as oh, this is an intellectual exercise. So I don't have to be as crazy about it.
yeah. I think maybe I'm trying to be the best at other things in my life that I maybe don't have the energy for that. But yeah, I do find that when I'm even in like a community level sport, that once the gun goes or whatever, that those instincts definitely take over and I go straight back into that competitive mindset. But I think maybe it's the things around that where I'm not in the same mindset that I was as a mogul skier, in terms of putting all my eggs in one basket because
Yeah.
I'm putting effort and energy and attention into other things that are important to me now.
Yeah, and those things matter too, like what you do for a living and what that looks like, how it evolves over time, and friends, family, all that. There's more space for that now as part of being a civilian. The funny thing as well is if you say you were training just as much once you finished, I found that my training is just as important to me. Like as I'm doing it, the motivation, all of that is just the same as it ever was. Like,
Yeah.
not even slightly less. But most other people don't care as much about, and that makes sense because it's like, I'm not doing this at that, it's not the same thing. But I've had to come to terms with it's not anything to do with me trying to beat anyone else. It's just I had to come to terms with the fact that it's no less meaningful to me, but it might be less meaningful to other people. And because I don't really derive a lot of my energy from what it means to other people, it's not much of a limiter, but it was definitely especially when you've got support staff and people that there's teammates, there's people that whatever their reasons are, professionally and otherwise, they care. And then it's, some version of go figure out what it means to you when you're not in the system. What you're describing is actually far healthier. And what I would steer, like there's a sense of proportion and evolution to it, and it makes a lot more sense. So all the power to you to continue to find things that fulfill your physical wellness, that you can sink your teeth into, that give you a competitive outlet, but exist within the context of these other things that are now important to you.
Yeah, I think maybe I haven't quite got to the healthy level yet, but still training. I know, like my colleagues at work ask me, what I do on the weekend or whatever. They're just like, how do you fit that in? Or even just during the week, like before and after work. But I think I need that. I love training. I've always loved it. Competing was my favorite thing in the world, but I still really enjoy training and even setting myself smaller goals to work towards. I love it and love being active. I think maybe I'm a little bit addicted to exercise. Maybe it's like, I don't know if it's the endorphins that I get from it or whatever, but I feel like I need it. And if I don't do it, my quality of life and enjoyment is just way, way lower. So
do you ever not do it? Like, if you had to have a break, since that big crash, I'd imagine there was a break there.
yeah.
Can you remember one recently and then having to work through, like, if you know what it's like when I feel shit if I don't. So the presumption would be that there's some time when you have felt that way based on.
Yeah. I think like I went over with the Aussie team for the Youth Olympic Games. It was about this time last year and was working like around the clock with them and definitely wasn't training as much as I normally would there. And same sort of thing. Like I was, itching to get back to it as soon as I got home, like back into my regular training routine. And it didn't feel as good there. But if I'm forced to do it, I know I'm not super happy. I'm probably a little bit grumpy, but I need to be training. But one thing I will say is that I learnt once I retired, I didn't have that like sense of like guilt if I was missing a session or whatever, that I became much better at knowing what my body needs to perform and that I actually
When you stopped.
when I stopped, I think I was the fittest and strongest I've ever been a year
So
after I retired.
a little annoying. That's
Yeah.
would have been useful to,
Yeah.
but also samesies,
Yeah.
which it justifies having these conversations, because if there's someone that's listening to this that pays more attention to their body when they're at the peak of their powers, at least the peak of their opportunities to pursue performance, and you have to have the confidence that if I step back, that's actually going to be in my best interest, as opposed to I'll do more because that'll help, because that's coming from a place of insecurity.
Yeah.
And so if you're listening to this and in some version of that dilemma, then I would say less is more. If you're the sort of person that's more likely to do, if you're normal, if your default is more is more, then I would say find opportunities to do less. Because with less opportunity to pursue training. I found ways in which to get more benefit from less because more wasn't an option. And then you're like, maybe we're overcooking it. Maybe there was, and
Yeah.
anywho,
I definitely overcooked it going into 2018 if I look back on that now. But when you're in there and you're told like you're telling yourself this is going to be the biggest year ever, I'm going to train the hardest. I'm not taking any sessions off. So
yeah,
yeah,
it's usually not the
lesson
people
learned.
that at the very top, like everyone's doing a lot of training, the events that we're talking about. So it's not that more makes the difference. What makes the difference is the quality of
Yeah.
that training, who's doing the best work, not the most. There's no medals for the most work in preparation. No one's
Knowing when to pull back and when to
yeah, exactly,
yeah.
exactly. It's not, there's no escaping the work. It's just more is not more. There is a tipping point and quality is important.
Yeah. And you're only as good as the training that you're going to recover from. So yeah, that's something I probably didn't learn till towards the end of my career as well.
I could keep talking with you. I've borrowed a lot of your time here. Really appreciate the conversation, Britt. And I go into these thinking there's things I want to know and understand better. And I feel good that I know you better and I understand your skiing career. And I look forward to seeing how things evolve for you now that you're on the other side. And then I'm curious as we go, does it feel like you just retired? Does it feel like something that's you've got some distance from now?
I think it feels like I just retired, and that's why like I can't believe it's less than a year until the next Olympics. So yeah, the time has flown by. I feel like I've done a lot in that space of time as well, but still I feel like I'm very connected to the sport. So I'm also very excited. First year next year, the first year that dual mogul skiing is included in the Olympic program. So the mogul skiers will have two opportunities for a medal.
What is dual mogul skiing?
So the event of mogul skiing, which you've seen in the Olympic Games, one athlete skis down at a time. Dual mogul skiing is two athletes head to head on the same course. There's gates down the middle, so you got red course and blue course, and you just need to beat the person next to you to get through to the next round, all the way through into the big final. It's the best spectator version of the sport.
What do you mean? Is you just so it's like a knockout
Yeah,
format?
exactly.
Okay,
Yep.
but same
Okay.
criteria.
Same criteria. Speed is a bit more of an emphasis in the judges' eyes. It is judged a little bit differently.
Yeah.
Still need to be, you still need to have the technique, but bigger emphasis on speed. So it gets pretty crazy, and people are pushed to their limits because you've got that person right next to you. So yeah, definitely
Well,
tune in.
something to look out for. Where can people find you? Do you want them to find you?
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
not physically,
Not
but
physically, digitally.
in the on
Yeah.
the Instagrams.
Yeah.
Yeah, Britt underscore mogul underscore Cox is my gram,
It
and
feels pretty much like still your identity is still
yeah, it's there,
mogulish.
so it's
Yeah.
not leaving.
Yeah. And you're still obviously very much involved with the sport. And like you said at various stages, I think when I speak to rowers and like, was rowing a sport that you loved or just a sport that was a good competitive outlet for you? And it definitely seems like you loved moguls and you still love moguls. So what a blessing to be at various stages of your career in your chosen sport and to feel really positive about that sport. So good for you.
Yeah, like love mogul skiing, I always have, and feel like I left the sport with having a really good relationship with it and with the people within the sport. So yeah, I feel like I'm still giving back to that community where I can and staying involved in various ways through, mentoring roles and sport governance, but also as a broadcaster. So yeah, love being able to share my sport with Aussies and the world. So yeah, hopefully we can get some more people around it in Milan.
Great. I'll watch it. People listening, watching, you watch it too. You've got a few more Moguls fans here now. Thanks, Britt. Really appreciate it.
Moguls fans.
Yeah.